Hello, everyone, and welcome to Persuasive Communication. My name is Mariana Pantic, and today is December 14, 2025. We just had our first snow in New York City this season, and that's why I'm wearing a scarf. I feel a little bit cold, but I am excited to share another lecture on persuasion with you. Let me share my screen. As you remember, our previous lecture was about formation and structure of attitudes, but today I'm going to talk about how we can change people's attitudes through persuasion, and I'm also going to cover a very important concept that you've probably heard about before, which is cognitive dissonance. Now, let's see how we can change people's attitudes. What is important for us as persuaders to understand about attitude change? First, we need to know how people cognitively process messages because that is essential for explaining our impact as communicators on their attitudes. The more accurately as we as scholars understand people's information processing modes, the better we can account for the varied impacts messages have on attitudes. We can't really understand communication effects without understanding how people go through this process in stages when they encounter a new message. One way to explain this is through inoculation theory. Let's look at inoculation strategies and what it means. So this theory is really interesting as it explains how exposing people to a weakened form of an argument against a particular idea can build their resistance to stronger future persuasion attempts. Inoculation theory works much like a vaccine. A small dose of counter arguments trigger people to develop defenses that protect their existing beliefs. So, inoculation basically offers a way to help people resist unwanted influence. So, let's say somebody tells me, "Oh, your French is not really so good." And then what my strategy with respect to inoculation would be, okay, I understand that my French is not so good. That is true. But on the other hand, I speak multiple other languages that people in several European countries speak, and I think they can assist me in performing my journalism job when I cover like different diplomatic meetings and so on. So that is like the way, like you admit that this is something that you do not, this is your weakness, but then on the other hand, you emphasize your strength. Your strengths. So let me reflect on another example of inoculation. In the 2016 Democratic presidential primaries, Bernie Sanders accepted the argument that he had less experience in foreign policy than his opponent Hillary Clinton. So you see, in this case, the issue that they were discussing was foreign policy. And the weakness that Bernie Sanders admitted to have was that he had less experience in foreign policy than his opponent. So he used this admission as an inoculation strategy. Sanders openly addressed this weakness, just like I addressed my weakness of not really speaking French so good. Actually, I'm pretty bad at it. But he explained this weakness, he addressed this weakness before his opponent could exploit it. So I don't mind being attacked because I've already admitted that this is my weakness. But then I reframe this issue by arguing that I have other strengths that suppress my weakness. So in this case, Bernie Sanders reframed the issue by arguing that experience is not as important as judgment. He reminded citizens that as a senator, he had voted against the controversial war in Iraq while Clinton supported it. To Sanders, it was an example of experience, but poor judgment. So you can see there is an issue, foreign policy. He admitted his weakness, that he had no experience, and then He emphasized that he had good judgment and then also provided an example for it. So that was an inoculation strategy. Now, I want you to think about this theory, read the textbook chapter assigned to you, and write an exercise. What you will need to do for this exercise, and I also want you to present this exercise in class when we meet. For this exercise, you will apply inoculation theory by creating your own brief resistance message. Choose a non-political topic where people often encounter misleading or unethical persuasion, such as health myths, consumer scams, or environmental misinformation. Identify a weakened version of a misleading claim your audience might face, then prepare a clear refutation explaining why that claim is flawed. Using these elements, craft a 5 to 7 sentence inoculation message that warns the audience about potential misinformation, presents the mild attack message, and offers your refutation to strengthen their resistance. So then once you complete it, post your exercise under inoculation message. Please post it before class, and then we will discuss the messages that you have created in class when we meet. Now, another way of processing information is the so-called Elaboration Likelihood Model. What does this model entail? This model helps us understand the effects of a host of source, message, and receiver factors on persuasion. So there are these three elements: the source of the message itself, and receivers, and how they impact persuasion. Elaboration in the model refers to the extent to which the individual thinks about or mentally modifies arguments contained in the communication, to what extent we elaborate on what we hear. And likelihood refers to the probability that an event will occur. Likelihood is used to point out the fact that elaboration can be either likely or unlikely. So this model posits that there are two routes to persuasion. The first one is the central route. Actually, one of the two is the central route. People carefully evaluate message arguments and relate information to their own knowledge, biases, and values. So if we hear a message, let's say, about why you should wear a mask during the pandemic, then people try to connect that message to their experience, like people who got affected by the virus, people who got really sick, and then they relate that to their own biases and their own values. The peripheral route is when people examine messages quickly and they focus on simple cues to help them decide whether to accept the position that is advocated in that message or whether to reject it. Let's take a better look into these two different forms of processing, information processing. With central processing, attitudes changed through this method are more likely to persist than those changed to peripheral processing. So we think, we elaborate on things in more detail, we connect it to our beliefs, values, to our values and our experiences. So we engage in this central processing of information. And when we change attitudes that way, those attitudes are more likely to persist. With central processing, persuaders need to convince people that an issue is really relevant to them. So this is why the issue is affecting you. This is why it is relevant. This is why you need to consider it. A persuader has to be careful when they are talking about someone's core values. People engage in bias processing when they have strong attitudes. So I, as a former smoker, have strong attitudes about cigarettes. I actually really don't like them. And for somebody to convince me that smoking in public is, or, restaurants, for instance, which is the case in my country, is fine, like they need to be aware of my core values, that I really don't like indoor smoking. So how are you going to convince me that smoking in certain restaurants should be allowed, for example? So the peripheral route, on the other hand, is when people process messages in a more shallow way, I would say, they tend to rely on simple decision rules or heuristics. One such example is experts should be believed. So that is when you just simply accept a recommendation because it comes from an authority figure. It is when I go to see my doctor and I don't have a degree in, I'm not a doctor, so I'm a doctor of communications, but I don't have a degree in medicine. And whatever they tell me to me, they're an authority figure. And if they say that I should change this habit, I will accept it. Probably if it's like a small thing that I'm supposed to accept, like, oh, you need to like start getting vitamin D or whatever. And if I think about it, I'm just listening to my doctor, and my doctor is an expert in the field, so I'm not going to go deep into what they recommended me to do. Rather, I would just accept, process the messages that they shared with me peripherally, because I'm not going to engage deeper. But if it were something more complex to me related to my health, I would probably be like looking into different sources, thinking about it, thinking how that would affect my life, compare that to my previous experience and so on. So that is going to be my central way of processing messages from them. So experts should be believed, leading someone to accept a recommendation solely because it comes from an authority figure. Another type is the bandwagon heuristic, and that is reflected in the idea that if many people think something is good, it must be good. So if the majority of people exercise, I'm going to exercise as well. So that's kind of the way to accept that message. A heavy use of jargon can convince people to buy something. That is when they process information this way. And also, seduction by a quick fix is also one of the, like, seduction by a quick fix also explain how we process information this way. And it refers to people believing credible sources without actually engaging more deeply in considering a content they receive from them. Peripheral appeals, peripheral appeals are often manipulative. What does it mean? They are frequently designed to trick people to ignore certain features of the product in favor of others. Now, can you identify how these heuristics have implications for social media? Take a look at likes, shares, and retweets. They basically act as quick cues of popularity. When we go online and we see a person sharing a message, and then all of a sudden they have 30,000, 300,000 likes or shares, we instantly tend to believe in what they see, because the numbers that we see there on social media, likes, shares, retweets, is kind of contributes to the person's credibility, the persons who share the person who shared that message. It contributes to the credibility, and we kind of just look at these small heuristics and we are instantly thinking that we should accept that message. Or let's say, for example, somebody gets a compliment for their selfie, and then when you see all these likes and shares of their selfie picture, you instantly believe that, oh, the person is really pretty, everybody likes them, and so on. The same goes for any other content like music or books. They can become widely popular even if their quality is questionable, simply because many people have already downloaded or endorsed them. You know, when you see a book, like I like to read a lot, and I frequently encounter books that everybody likes, but all of a sudden I don't see the real value in them. And the same goes with music. um like, why do people like this song so much? Like, there's another song that is way much better, but then it hasn't been downloaded that many times as this one. So what does it say? It's basically, we're just looking at what is popular, and we instantly start consuming that content because we're not really thinking to what extent we're not processing this information centrally but peripherally, and we're not really thinking about whether that's like the type of book we would read, whether the story would be interesting to us. And so it's simply, let's just take it and if other people, if it's that popular, it must be a good book. Or if that song has been downloaded that many times, it must be good. What factors determine our processing strategies? So the first one is motivation. When people are motivated to consider the message seriously, they process it centrally. When they lack motivation or the ability to process the message carefully, they process superficially. Let's say when it comes to books, I really tend to be motivated to consider every message seriously. So if somebody wants to convince me to read a book, they really need to explain in detail. They need to find like certain appeals that are important to me when they're describing the book and the reasons why I should read it. And then if I lack motivation, let's say if we are just today like picking a restaurant where we're going to eat, but I'm not like really I'm not really like that obsessed about specific like specific cuisine, or I'm just whatever, we can go whatever. And then it's really like I'm more likely to process all the messages and like the way people would try to convince me to go to this restaurant instead of that one superficially, if I'm like just not motivated to consider the message, because I don't mind whether we're going to go to one place or the other. So motivation really depends on an individual's personal involvement in issue, how much something is important to them, because and to what extent we're involved. Like if let's say of course I would care more about things happening at my university where I work than things happening somewhere else, because I'm involved in the university where I teach. So when it comes to high involvement, then people will be more motivated to engage in issue relevant thinking. So if something is happening in my school, I would start thinking like, oh, let's see what's going on, and I want to be because I'm involved here and I really care about the university's policies and like other changes that we're going to have in our school. The need for cognition is one part of that motivation, and it's basically a personality trait that refers to a person's stable tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful thinking. So some of us really like to sit through things. We really enjoy thinking deeply, and we are motivated when we receive a message. We are motivated to dissect it, to elaborate on it, to think related to our own experience, our own values, before making a decision whether we should accept it or not. And another factor that determines our processing strategy is our ability to process the message. And because people are less able to process a message when they're distracted. So if I'm cold, let's say you're like attending a public lecture, and the room where the lecture is taking place is cold, there's noise coming from the streets. There are like so many factors that affect the way you're going to process the message. You're too distracted by things happening around you, that it affects your processing of that information. Some criticism of this model, um, Elaboration Likelihood Model, is the overlap between source and message. While ELM assumes that source and message effects can be separated, in reality, they often interact and influence one another. Another one is limited guidance for message design. This model basically provides minimal direction on how to craft high-quality arguments or persuasive content under conditions of high elaboration on messages than empirical limitation. There's not much research on ELM. So this model has been tested insufficiently in real-world contexts, resulting in low ecological validity, particularly for urgent social issues like health or climate change. And also, when it comes to peripheral versus central cues distinction, this distinction is not always clear, reducing the model's usefulness as a predictive, deductive frame. And one more model that I'm going to discuss briefly is the Heuristic-Systemic Model, dual processing modes. So this model is similar to ELM as it posits two ways of processing messages: systematic, which is very similar to central message processing. It's careful, comprehensive, and then there's heuristic processing, which is basically shortcut based. When it comes to motivation and ability guide processing, this model poses that people choose between effortful and shortcut processing based on their goals, need for accuracy, self-concept, or desire to impress others. Another thing is non-exclusive processes and principles. Heuristic and systematic processing can occur simultaneously, governed by the least effort principle, preferring minimal cognitive effort, and sufficiency principle, which means exerting enough effort to reach satisfactory confidence. So these models basically tell us how people process messages and what can we expect. So imagine, especially when we're talking about systematic, careful, comprehensive, or central processing of messages. Imagine delivering a public lecture on issues such as how social media impact people's mental health. Imagine that there will be people who already use social media and they're really curious about the topic and they're motivated to understand how social media impacts individuals' mental health, and they're more likely to, because they might consider changing their behavior based on the messages that they receive from you, and they're more likely to engage in central processing if they are really motivated to understand it and if they have the ability to comprehend the messages you share with them. Let's take a look at a couple of persuasion tips based on these models of processing information. What is it that you should take into consideration? When you prepare a presentation, just ask yourself if the audience cares a lot about the issue. And I gave you an example of social media and mental health. Prepare strong arguments if it is a high involvement issue. So for somebody who uses social media extensively, this is definitely a high involvement issue. So in that case, how do you know whether the people in your audience use social media extensively? So it would be good to, let's say, distribute a survey to them, um, a brief survey about their social media habits before you deliver a lecture to them. That could be like a good way to understand your audience better before you address them. If it is a low involvement matter, emphasize peripheral cues. Like the example of the restaurant, I'm like, I just want to go out. I really don't care where we go. Oh, this restaurant is moderately priced. It has good food, 4 stars. And I'm like, 4-star rating. And I'm like, okay, just let's go. So that's basically how these different cues work. Something that appears peripheral to you may be of considerable importance to others. So take that into consideration. Just because like I don't find something that relevant, it could be relevant for other people in case of this example with restaurants. So maybe it's not important to me, but for somebody who has food sensitivities, allergies, and so on, they really need to know more details about where we are going and what their menu options are versus me who doesn't really care that much. Pay attention to nonverbal cues. People are more persuaded by your messages if they sit up straight, nod their heads, and smile. Sometimes I found this very useful when I would deliver lectures, especially when I would talk about my research at conferences, I pay attention to how people react to my speech, and because that really shows me to what extent they're engaged. Like, see if they sit up straight, see if they make that eye contact with you, if they smile and nod their head. So you will, based on that, you will also understand to what extent they understand your messages. So that was about information processing. And I also wanted to discuss with you today cognitive dissonance theory. This is one of my favorite theories. And it basically represents a psychology concept describing the mental discomfort we feel when we hold two conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors at the same time. So the discomfort between conflicting beliefs and attitudes. Let's take a look at the background of this theory. Cognitive dissonance was developed by Leon Festinger in 1957. He conducted multiple experiments on dissonance effects. Dissonance basically arises from incongruent conditions such as loving junk food on one hand while knowing it is unhealthy, or making costly decisions that lead to disappointing outcomes. So you know that you love junk food, but you also know that this food is unhealthy. So these are two conflicting cognitions that you have and that you need to reconcile. Dissonance is a neurologically arousing state that activates brain regions involved in conflict, motivating people to reduce the discomfort. And how do they reduce it? They rationalize their decision, change their attitudes, or justify behavior. So I'm going to change my attitude by saying, well, maybe junk food is not so unhealthy, or I'm gonna rationalize it by saying, oh, okay, but I just ate junk food today. Like for the remainder of the week, I'll be eating healthy. The magnitude and consequences of dissonance depend on factors like importance and number of conflicting elements. Let's go back to the junk food example. So, how does this work? Your mind, why is cognitive dissonance problematic? Your mind wants your thoughts and actions to line up. You know, when we fall in love with someone, when we really like someone, but then that person turns out to be somebody who doesn't share our values. All of a sudden, they're an egomaniac. There's somebody who is not very tidy. There's somebody who is full of themselves, but they're also charming. So we're trying to understand these conflicting thoughts that we have about them. On one hand, we really like them, we feel attached, but then on the other hand, I don't really like the fact that this person is narcissistic, egomaniac, that the person is not so tidy. So how do we deal with these things? So this this tension, that is what dissonance is. And it pushes you to do something to fix the mismatch. What are you going to do? Like you either need to figure out how to be with that person or simply leave them. So you need to reduce the dissonance. So it occurs basically when there are two inconsistent cognitions, such as I like the person is charming, but then on the other hand, the person is very narcissistic. So that's not so charming. And another example is eating junk food is unhealthy, but your behavior is I eat junk food all the time. It's just like in case of falling in love with a narcissist. It's like, oh, I really don't like that this person only thinks about themselves. But then on the other hand, my behavior is I'm still staying in this relationship with the person. So you feel that discomfort. That's why many people, when they are basically with individuals who are wrong for them, when they get into that situation, they feel constant discomfort because they cannot reconcile these two different cognitions. So when you feel that discomfort, you try to justify it. Oh, but they're so charming. You know, we see each other every day, blah, blah. And the same thing goes with junk food. I'll eat healthier tomorrow. Okay, I ate bad food today, but I'll be eating healthier tomorrow. So it changes your belief that junk food is not so bad, and it changes your behavior. How do we face discomfort? So dissonance is really uncomfortable. It's psychologically arousing and drives individuals to take steps to reduce this uncomfortable state. So again, you'll be rationalizing your decision to engage in activities that are not good for you, or you will try to change your attitudes about them. So dissonance occurs under several conditions, such as when an individual is faced with a psychologically difficult decision, expends efforts to participate in what turns out to be less than ideal task, in general, freely performs a behavior that is inconsistent with an attitude. Individuals are motivated to take steps to reduce dissonance. It is just when people are against gay marriages, but then you direct them to some example of the people they love, that they're close with, that are in gay relationships, and then they kind of try to reconcile these two different cognitions. Like on one hand, I'm against this form of, they would say, like on one hand, like they would see that they're kind of against gay marriages, but then on the other hand, they have friends who are in gay relationships or marriages, and they love them, they're close to them, so they kind of try to reconcile these two different cognitions. One method to rid oneself of dissonance is to change the problematic attitude after receiving a persuasive messages. John and Jake are in a gay marriage and they're your close friends and you like them and they borrow you money for down payment for the down payment for your apartment. So all of a sudden you're thinking, maybe I should accept that people will have that people of the same sex will have a marriage. So basically, there has to be a good, strong, persuasive message that will make people change the problematic attitude and that will help them get rid of the dissonance that they are experiencing. Attitude change resistance and rationalization. It is important to know that cognitive dissonance is relevant to us because it explains why people resist attitude change, even when confronted with strong contradictory evidence. So why do people resist to change their attitude about junk food, even though there's so much research that shows this food is not good for your health? How is it that they reduce how is it that they are so willing to resist this attitude change? So basically, they reduce discomfort by doubling down on their original beliefs. Real world examples span the political spectrum, from liberals, for example, who are minimizing protest-related violence after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. So they couldn't reconcile these two cognitions. Like on one hand, it was very important to raise your voice about the murder of George Floyd. These protests were really very powerful, very important in our country on one hand, but then on the other hand, it doesn't mean that certain violence didn't happen during those protests, and we shouldn't be minimizing that. But it happens. So with cognitive dissonance, again, it happens that this is the way for them to reduce discomfort when they're presented with two different attitudes, beliefs. Also, conservatives insisting immigration increases crime, to vaccine skeptics rejecting scientific evidence, showing it all shows how dissonance protects existing attitudes. Dissonance also explains everyday rationalization, such as people convincing themselves that skipping COVID precautions is harmless because following precautions feels burdensome. Now let's go back to attitude change. While many other theories suggest, and why cognitive dissonance is important to us. So other theories basically suggest how attitudes can produce changes in behavior. So we change our attitude, we change our behavior. Somebody convinces the smoking is bad, we change attitudes towards cigarettes, and then we change our behavior by we quit smoking. So we're no longer a smoker. The same thing applies to any other addiction. But so this is basically what the majority of theories focus on. They focus on how these attitudes, if we change people's attitudes, we can change their behavior. With dissonance theory basically shows us how behavior can change attitudes. And this is me as a former smoker. I keep talking about it. It's not about, this is how I quit smoking. I basically decided I didn't change my attitude about cigarettes when I was a smoker. It was still positive. But what I did, I realized that I was breathing with some difficulties. So I didn't really like how they made me feel, even though I had like a very positive attitude towards cigarettes at that time. And then what I did, I changed my behavior. I decided to quit smoking and see how it will affect my life. So I changed my behavior. I quit smoking. I I just after a while, I realized that my apartment didn't smell like cigarettes anymore, that I started breathing normally, that I started running, so I wasn't able to run before that. So basically, after I changed my behavior and quit smoking, I changed my attitudes towards cigarettes. So I don't have a positive attitude anymore. So what I'm trying to say is that this is an example of how dissonance changes attitudes. So how cognitive dissonance basically explains like how our behavior can change our attitudes. But for this to happen, the crucial point is people persuading themselves to adopt a new attitude. So you change your behavior, and then you see all these valuable things happening to you, all these good things happening to you, and then you accept your new behavior. You persuade yourself that it's actually much better this way, and you adopt a new attitude. Another thing, how we change, so people must persuade themselves. And that's why when we go back and think about, um, we discussed how attitudes are being formed, and we discussed how basically people need to hear your arguments, you need to accept their viewpoint, you need to frame those arguments in a way that is not offensive, that you like acknowledge why they hold certain values, but then you kind of direct them towards self-persuasion. So you direct them to persuade themselves to change behavior. So that is how attitudes change. And also, research shows that when people publicly commit to or enact behaviors that conflict with their prior views, they may self-persuade and adopt new attitudes. So this happens with, those shows when people decide to lose weight or quit using drugs or, do something else, and they publicly commit. I see people frequently saying on Twitter and other social media platforms, "Oh, I've been clean for a year." So it's kind of, they're making a public commitment to stay clean. So that represents a likelihood of attitude change. So when people publicly commit to or enact behaviors that conflict with their prior views, they may self-persuade and adopt new attitudes. Also, it is important for attitude change that people freely choose to perform the behavior that create dissonance. When behavior is coerced, forced, dissonance is not aroused. So we need to be free to make a decision. Nobody ever pushed me to quit smoking. I decided freely to do that. Self-affirmation can make people more often to attitude change when their sense of self-worth is boosted, or so they feel less threatened by a message. And also, without dissonance, there is no internal pressure to rationalize or change behavior. Let's take a look at dissonance and persuasion and what scholars say who did research in this area. According to them, dissonance, persuaders, like how should persuaders utilize dissonance in when crafting persuasive messages? Basically, persuaders should deliberately arouse cognitive dissonance and then let psychology do its work. So point at the problem and then let psychology do its work. Once the person feels this dissonance, they should be motivated to reduce the discomfort. So that's the whole point of making them like pointing so directly at that dissonance. A common way to reduce it is by shifting attitudes towards the persuader positions. He or she points at the problem and then uh, significantly raises this issue, and then you think about it and you start shifting your attitudes towards what they say. Persuader try Persuaders try to show individuals that they harbor an uncomfortable inconsistency, such as making a prejudice statement against a particular group of people that is the opposite of their tolerant values. So, like they have problems with a specific group of immigrants, for example, and then you point them at, oh, but you have friends who are from that country and so on, and then they rethink their position. So you need to really point at this uncomfortable inconsistency, so they'll think about it and start aligning more with your position. Understanding this inconsistency, the person engages in self-persuasion to restore internal consistency. So again, like the element of self-persuasion is really crucial. You should provide arguments and let people decide, guide them towards like behavior change, attitude change, and self-persuasion. Let's take a look at the most important concepts of this lecture. Inoculation theory, we talked about that. It basically poses that exposing people to a weakened version of an opposing argument can increase their resistance to stronger future persuasion attempts. The Elaboration Likelihood Model explains how people are influenced either through careful, thoughtful evaluation of message content, which represents the central route of message processing, or by relying on simple cues and heuristics, or peripheral route. The heuristic-systemic model posits two ways of processing messages: systemic, similar to central route, careful, comprehensive, and heuristics, shortcut-based processing. And finally, cognitive dissonance is a psychological concept that describes the mental discomfort we feel when we hold two conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors at the same time. This is my reference. Please continue reading Perloff. This is an excellent book, The Dynamic of Persuasion. Thank you very much. You know where to find me if you need me. And thank you very much again for listening. I really enjoyed delivering this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon.